Hey, it's Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining in today. I have a really special guest. Her name is Janice Isman, and she owns Body Couture, which is her own business. She is a trauma sensitive movement specialist. So, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, it's really great to be here.
Now, tell me a little bit exactly what Body Couture is and what trauma sensitive body movement is.
Yeah. My business is really all about customized solutions that are a body first approach that really look at how the body can work better. And that means a lot of things, but basically, I'm looking at that intersection of movement and mental health. I'm looking at people, I work mostly with people who have pain, movement limitations, injuries, something's propelling them to come in to see me and get kind of a really specialized service. So some of those things include getting referred by a therapist. It might also include having gone to multiple specialists and nothing being medically quote unquote, and I'm using quotation marks, wrong with them. So, I love people who've been to doctors, acupuncturists, massage therapists, whatever it is, and there's kind of like nothing wrong. I do have people who have terminal illnesses. I have people that self-refer. I have people that are referred by physiotherapists. So it's a whole range of how can we be more comfortable in our body. And I'm using what we would have called mind body exercises 10 or 20 years ago, as well as trauma therapy updates to that. So the word trauma sensitive really refers to a very specific designation. That designation is a bit of a tongue twister. So it is called Trauma Center Trauma Sensitive Yoga. And you'll notice in my title, I've taken the word yoga out of there. And I actually do that for multiple reasons. One of which is as soon as you say the word yoga, a lot of people go into a whole space of, well, I'm not flexible. I can't do yoga. I don't like yoga, all the things.
Yeah.
So what I really do is take those evidence-based principles and infuse them into all kinds of movements because those principles are really based on things like choice, rhythm, taking effective action. So every single way that we move can actually have a positive impact on our pain, on our mental health, on our quality of life, etc.
Yeah. Do you incorporate breath work into that as well then? Because I know that's a big part of yoga, but
I don't.
okay.
And actually, in that trauma sensitive work, typically we actually do not. So, breath, I think there are trauma informed breathwork protocols. I have been a person that really struggles with breath. One of the pieces of trauma sensitive work is that the instructor is a peer and we're a facilitator. We're not experts. And so that idea of I'm going to tell you how to breathe, that doesn't work for me as a human, but it
Mhm.
also just is actually sits outside of that work. And that doesn't mean that there aren't trauma sensitive folks out there who are good at that and should do that, but that isn't kind of my jam.
And let's talk about your business, Body Couture. So how did that kind of come about?
Um, I mean, the name really means customized. So actually, when I started taking my trainings, I did it just for me, and that kind of folds into like my story where I always felt like something was wrong with my body. Something eventually was wrong with my body, and then trying to like sort out how do I feel better? How do I not have pain? How do I live a life where I can move and do things that I want to do? And I eventually started taking trainings, and they were actually at that time they were just for my own personal knowledge.
Yeah.
But because I actually had a totally separate career, every I shouldn't say every, but almost all trainings require a practical component. So you don't get to, as a yoga teacher, and you shouldn't actually, um, take all of this information. You take your 200-hour training and then you leave. You have to do it in your own body and then you have to teach it to other people. So my Pilates training required hundreds of hours of instructing others. And so from day one, I always taught people one to one because I had another job. So I wasn't a great candidate for let's go teach classes at the gym during the day because I was working during the day. So I actually kind of stumbled upon that in a way, but the work is way more powerful when it's customized. So when we look at, I have a whole toolkit of like 17 or 18 different certifications. And when we look at what is effective for one person, it's going to be really different than what's effective for someone else.
So when somebody contacts you, what are some of the things you guys go over right away?
Mm-hmm. First of all, what is their chief complaint? And am I a candidate for helping them with that? So there are things, and you just asked about one of them. If somebody really wants that breathwork component, I'm not going to be a great candidate. That actually did happen a couple of weeks ago. Somebody was looking for meditation and breathwork. And to be honest, there's significantly better people out there to do that. Most of the time at the other end of the line is somebody who's got a laundry list of complaints about their body and about their experience in their body, anything from body shame to pain to having an illness or injury. And if they are qualified as, I've seen this problem before, or I know what to do with that, then we kind of move forward into some of the philosophies of how I work. And some of those things include, I really am big on self-agency. So if somebody spends an hour a week with me, they have 167 hours without me. So how can they incorporate this into their life? And that, I've had some pushback on the word homework, but really they get homework.
Yeah.
So are they willing to do that? I use a lot of education in my teaching. So we're not just doing kind of choreography. I have a skeleton that's behind me, and I'll walk over and kind of teach a bit of anatomy. So if that's not of interest to somebody, we're not going to be a match. The other piece is I really work on a pyramid basis. So at the bottom of the work, we have to be out of pain. So if somebody comes in and they're like, I need to lose weight and it has to happen in 2 weeks and my back hurts, we're going to work on that back pain first.
Yeah.
And so there is a bit of a process because a lot of people are kind of moving around in bodies that are, if you're in pain, you have a lot of compression and tightness and movement patterns that aren't so great, et cetera. So we look at those first. We don't kind of jump to, let's do some advanced Pilates so that you get your sweat on. Again, there's other places to go do that if you want to. So I'm going to work on those kind of like foundational principles of, let's really have something called interoception, which is where you can really read your body. We're going to remove that pain and work from there. So that's kind of a little bit what that conversation ends up looking like. I think most of the time, most people who contact me have already been on my website and they've already been looking at other solutions. So I haven't ever had anybody who's like, no, none of that sounds aligned. But, it is a very different way of working than our traditional kind of gym culture, which is really based on pushing, sweating, the don't break till you shake kind of concepts. And I'm really about, let's feel the body. Let's get to know your body. Let's get you out of pain. And then we build all the movement on top of that.
Yeah. So with the word trauma, a lot of times that can mean a lot of different things.
Yes.
So what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I didn't make this up. I have trainings from Gabor Mate, and I took somatic experiencing with Peter Levine. I'm currently finishing up a course with Bessel van der Kolk. So these are some of the big names in trauma, and from them, my understanding of trauma is that it is an experience that overwhelms the body. So it doesn't need to be a big experience. It can be. So when I say big experience, I have heard delineation between kind of big T traumas and little T traumas. For me, it doesn't actually matter. So things like a big T trauma might be a car accident, a school shooting, a war, a famine, kind of those really large, a hurricane, those big things that kind of maybe made the news. So that is a very old definition. And some people still really, I think that becomes part of the challenge with trauma, because there's a lot of people who kind of still think if it wasn't a big thing, it's not a big thing. So in the 1990s, a woman named Judith Herman, who I haven't studied with, really did a lot of work around how most trauma is relational. So we do have kind of those big events where your house burns down or what have you, but most of us are walking around with relational trauma. So that's a lot of in the category of childhood trauma, which most of us have heard something about. And so trauma is actually healed relationally, but really a relational trauma could be a 2-year-old that needed something that they didn't get. That's the other evolution, is that even within that childhood trauma piece, we have the adverse childhood experiences, which are things that did happen. So those are going to be a parent was an addict, a parent went to prison, a parent was abusive. Now we actually understand as well, and this is another evolution even within that relational piece. It can be things that didn't happen. It can be that you just didn't get emotionally seen. You didn't get some of those emotional needs met. So for me, because I'm not working on verbal processing of trauma, I'm not having those kind of deep dive discussions, but I've certainly done the coursework around understanding what it is. And it's just something that basically floods your body and you're unable to process.
So from a younger age, well, I was 16 when I got pregnant and had twins, and one of my sons has cerebral palsy. And part of his therapy was we had a woman come in who did craniosacral work and Reiki work.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into massage therapy, which is what I did before what I do now. And so we kind of have a similar background. Bezel van der Kolk. I've read his book 2 or 3 times. I probably pronounced his name wrong. So the idea of trauma getting stuck in our bodies and the idea of we're reliving our trauma every time something happens to us. I know that's true. How do you go about education to somebody that is referred to you, maybe because they have a knee problem and nothing else is working? How do you kind of begin that process of education?
Carefully. So I do have a set of clients who come to me via therapists. And so that is definitely a more open door because they have self-identified themselves as people with trauma. If it is somebody who just has a physical complaint, the honest truth is sometimes I never have that conversation. Yeah. So the principles that we're working with are things that can be broadly applied, whether we ever kind of apply that word to it or not. But one of the actual reasons that I got into the trauma work in the first place was because I noticed that as we did a lot of this work, people would start having emotional revelations. Yeah. And it would often be in the form of somebody would either cry or start sharing really challenging, difficult subject matter in the middle of an exercise and then look at me and say, I don't know why I'm sharing this with you. So as it was kind of becoming a really evident pattern, and I'm sure massage therapists actually are very familiar with that idea too. You work on a body and then people start sharing things with you. So I actually went to see a therapist because I was like, I leave my office and like I actually am a lone parent, so I still had to go home and raise my child by myself. And so I would leave feeling just like flung against a wall sometimes. And so I went to the therapist and I was like, what do I do with this? And so he directed me towards trauma work. What I'm able to do now is ease people into that in ways where they're not having those collapses. So people will share things with me and have conversation with me, but they never have to kind of come to that place where they're having a huge release. I have still had people midpoint somewhere in their work where they're like, I think I have trauma. So, I mean, honestly, it's all over the place. I don't diagnose people. So I'm not a diagnostic clinician where I'm like, hey, you have trauma. And I know because of how your knee moves. That's not what happens. What we know about pain at this moment in history is that some pain is caused by trauma, but not all pain is caused by trauma. So they are not, they're correlated, but they're not necessarily inversely correlated. So you can have pain that has nothing to do with trauma, but you also might have trauma that causes pain. So I'm careful with how I present it. Now, that said, it's on my website. So I find increasingly that the kind of client base that contacts me,
They're
that's
aware.
part of the appeal of why they're contacting me in the first place.
Yeah, they're aware and
Yeah.
they want your help.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were in corporate. What was your life before this life?
Ooh, I had a fun life. I actually used to work in the media. So I was in the fashion media, and I was living my best life as a childless woman who had access to all kinds of great events and parties and human beings. That it was a lot of fun. I think there was also an element that was bathed in busyness to the point where I never processed emotions. There was a lot of compensatory activities like shopping and other things to kind of make up for the stress and the anxiety. And my personal life was just really whittled to, like, to be fair, I didn't start work until like mid morning, but I also didn't get home until like 10 p.m. kind of idea. So much as I loved that life, there was also a piece of it that was really, it wasn't very balanced. It was very stressful. And that's why I left ultimately.
So when you first started your healing process, was it to try to find balance then to where you're at now?
No, I think what would happen. So I grew up in a very stoic home. We didn't share a lot of emotions. When we had emotions, we were to kind of go outside, go to another room, kind of get that under control. When we had that under control, we could come back and rejoin the room. So, in my 20s and into my 30s, I would literally do the same thing. So it was like I would just do anything to not feel, whether that was drink or to go running until you're kind of numb. Like I used to definitely over exercise. You go shopping, you get that little high, working. And I know that all of these things are kind of familiar to a whole set of people that are listening. And then what would happen is every now and then it would all just come out. So I would, end up sitting on my friend's couch crying about something that had happened 8 months before. And it would be like this inconsolable, like kind of crazy drama fest. And that's part of what, to be honest, like emotionally really scared me about tapping into that. Cause I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to stop crying. Then it will start. And if I open that door, it's just going to be this avalanche where I can never kind of cap that. And that didn't turn out to be true, but that's kind of what my life looked like at that point. And I did have a lot of fun, and I don't regret any of my, choices, but I didn't know how to do anything different either, because I wasn't given kind of that skill set. And that wasn't my parents' fault. They didn't have it either. Right. It just, that's how these things happen. So I didn't even know how to begin to work through that.
I know for myself and other women I've interviewed in our 20s and 30s, that's the time where we think we have to make our mark on the world, and we just hold everything in because that's what we think we're supposed to do, because that's what we see on TV, and you were in the media, so you were probably surrounded by it.
Oh yeah,
as well, and yeah, you're afraid if you open up, where's it going to lead, and you don't have time for that, for one. And
no. Yeah, no, it's true. There's a lot there. You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm not even sure kind of about what point in the process I kind of set this aside, but there is a lot I don't have the experience of being a man, so I'm not saying this doesn't happen to men. I just don't know it. For women, we have to have, you have to have that perfect wrinkle-free face. You always have to be made up, and your hair has to be colored the right color, and you have to be thin, and you have to be wearing a cute outfit, and your apartment needs to look like it came out of a magazine. And meanwhile, like, you started work 4 years ago, and like, you have no money, and you're kind of, kind of cultivate all this while um, theoretically, like, developing your career and finishing up your education and meeting your life partner. And it's just like a crazy list of things to do whilst also looking perfect and making sure that you're nurturing everybody around you and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I, at some point in the last, 10 years, I've just dropped that, and I don't care. But that was a really heavy burden, because especially when you're not processing your emotions, you have to scrub the environment and make sure that you look cute in every picture, and that your apartment looks cute and everything's cute, right?
Yep. So I know you said you didn't know exactly when it started, but what was the feeling that you got when you first started hearing about the work that you do? Where did you find it? What inspired you to kind of follow that path?
So I think it was definitely just kind of, I had long had a feeling like, even though I was doing these trainings, even within that context, the trainings that I did in terms of the mind body exercises
Yeah.
really helped me feel strong and some balance, and I did feel better. But when I would go into those kind of, if you've ever taken a fitness training, they're definitely more intensive than anything that you would typically do in any sort of fitness environment. And part of it's just like, you're doing it 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day, or you're doing, a 10-day or a 42-day or whatever it is, intensive. So they really push your body in ways that, like, I would never give to a client. And I would end up feeling like something was wrong with me. And that something that was wrong with me was both physical and emotional and intellectual. I have a sort of, and I don't think this is like super uncommon in trauma exposed people, but I have this sort of, like, I call it like a body dyslexia, where I can watch somebody do a movement, and then to try to figure out how to make my body do that, it's not easy. So I have to kind of deconstruct it. Things are often backwards. I'll put my body in the wrong spot. I'll move the wrong arm. It's just that way for me, and it
Yeah.
always has been. So, I would come through these trainings, and really the word I would use now, this didn't actually happen when I did my Pilates training, but it's because it was spaced out over a year. But I would get triggered. So that would lead me to, like, a couple of things happen. I dissociate. So I would kind of have that spacey, like, dizzy thing. And then that was frustrating, because I'm quite intellectual, and I like a fact, and I like a statistic, and I like a sentence, and I like something that's really grounded in those kind of details, and I can't remember them when I'm kind of like that. I would wonder why everybody else seemed pretty straightforward for them. And that was not my experience. So, when I heard about trauma, I don't think I linked any of that together, because for me, that had been happening my whole life. So it's not like I could ever really pick apart and be like, oh yeah, it wasn't like this before. Now that's happening. And I think that's where some of the stuff with our body gets super challenging, because if we've always related to that sensation or that reaction or that response or how it feels, it's really hard to be like, oh, something's wrong. And it was really only when I kind of compared myself to my cohort, which has its own dangers, because then all of
Yeah.
these insecurities and crazy thoughts and different things come up, that I was like, yeah, something is the matter. So for me, I don't know that I actually was like, oh, trauma sensitive work, that's the answer. And it's because this was long enough ago that trauma sensitive work didn't exist. It wasn't part of our cultural conversation. It wasn't something that people talked about. So I had to kind of cobble stuff together, even after the therapist kind of shared this with me. My first point of entry. I live in Canada, and lucky for me, Gabor Mate lives in Canada. So he happened to be coming. He came to the city a couple of hours from me. So I got in my car and I drove to hear his presentation. And then I went and spoke to him after. And at that time, he didn't have a professional
Yeah. Could you tell
training
me who
program.
that is real quick?
Yeah. So Gabor Mate is, he's a former physician, and he has done a lot of work around trauma. So he does have a whole training program called Compassionate Inquiry. And really that combines a whole bunch of different therapeutic approaches, but the underpinning to it all is really compassion as a healing modality for
Oh,
trauma.
I love that.
Yeah, it's great. But his kind of entry point, he was a physician in an injection clinic in Vancouver. So he worked with addicts who were bringing supply in to inject themselves. And what he noticed was that most of these folks needed some mental health supports and they weren't able to get it. And so he started kind of just ad hoc providing what he could, and recognized in kind of getting to know them and talking to them that the common factor that 100% of them had was trauma. So a traumatic circumstance, traumatic childhood experiences, etc. So he started really doing a lot of work in the addictions field. And that's kind of how he launched everything else that subsequently arrived. But I read his books, and he has a book called The Body Says No. And that for me was actually, if there was a moment, I was like, whoa.
Okay.
And it's really all about how, like, he called it stress at the time because it was written 10 or 15 years ago. And just how stress manifests in illness and disease. And so that was kind of immediately after the therapist had told me, look into some trauma trainings. And although he never used the word trauma, that was the first kind of linking. I was like, ooh, there's a thing that happens in our body when we have kind of these difficult emotional circumstances. Let's dig in. So I went and had a chat with him, but he didn't have a professional training program. So, I mean, it's remarkable because what I'm talking about wasn't 50 years ago. It wasn't 30 years ago.
How long ago was it?
That was probably, well, my business has been open 11 years. So, I mean, I'm going to say less than that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy because I think it would be hard at this moment to find somebody who wasn't familiar with the word trauma. But a decade ago, it was a specialty topic that really therapists were talking about with their clients. And you couldn't find a podcast or a training or anything that was easily accessible. And I live in a big city, but there was nothing really here and what my interest wasn't to become a therapist. My interest was, how does this impact the body? Yeah. What does the body have to do with this? And
how do I heal myself? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, subsequently, Bessel van der Kolk wrote his magnificent tome, but that didn't exist at that point. So, so I just kind of started following those threads and eventually kind of found them all, I think. But it wasn't easy because we also, again, like, it's crazy to think about, but a decade ago, it wasn't easy to find an online training either. So, at that point I had quite a young child. And so to do a training meant, take yourself to Boston or take yourself to wherever. And so the internet also facilitated a lot of great stuff for me because I was able to do some of it from home, which was awesome.
Yeah. How old is your child now?
They are young teenagers, 13, almost 14.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So my son's 16, my youngest, and yeah, I'm actually homeschooling him this year, so it's pretty interesting. It's good. It's really good, but it's interesting. I was going to actually tell you that before we started. Like, well, he might come out in his underwear. Like,
as teenagers do.
Yeah.
I find that is remarkable because I gave that one a shot during the pandemic shutdowns, and much as I teach adults for a living, teaching my child didn't go well.
Yeah. It's been okay. It's only been a few weeks, but anyways, back on topic. How do you what is your elevator pitch? I guess is the question I'm trying to get to. So what is it when you meet somebody and it's do you know what I'm talking about? First off,
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, how do you condense what you do into a few sentences?
I mean, I keep the trauma piece out of it. I just say I help people feel better in their body. And then
awesome.
If somebody is interested, then I actually start to talk about pain, because that's something that's very concrete. It's very black and white. People get that. And that is really a key piece of what I do as well. So, back pain, knee pain, hip pain, neck pain, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then if somebody kind of continues that level of interest, then I may or may not mention that I also work at the intersection of trauma and the body. I mean, it isn't my job title, but so I help people feel better in their body. And that means so many things to different people. And I really am, I'm more focused on movement than I am on exercise, which sounds weird, but it is, sorry, I'll rephrase that. I'm more focused on movement than I am on exercise. And really what that means is that we feel better in our body and we process our emotions through rhythm and movement. And not everybody loves exercise. So I actually work, my space is right across the street from a big commercial gym. There's people in there and they're very happy with what they're doing. And that's great. So they should carry forth with what they're doing. But a lot of statistics show that like 85% of North Americans don't go to the gym and they don't exercise enough. So really those folks are the ones that I'm speaking to. How can we get your body to be part of your mental health process, to be part of your health process, and to do it away from kind of that, like, we're going to get toned abs and we're going to get this or we're going to get that. We're not going to get anything. What we're going to do is really get into our body and feel our body and then make decisions of what feels good to our body. And nobody can do that when you have sciatica and your neck is burning or you have, whatever else going on. So that has to come first. And then as you work through that process, that emotional piece is huge, because if you're having triggers and trauma responses, your whole nervous system is going crazy and your fascia is responding to that and everything is kind of responding. So that's a huge part of it too, is we have to kind of get it all working as a system. And you're never going to feel great in your body if you're constantly triggered or if you're constantly sedentary.
Yeah. And I like kind of how you were speaking. It's like, it's a whole, it's not just working out. It's not just,
it's everything.
It's everything. And it's shutting out everything.
Yeah.
Because I think it's so easy to do.
That was, early on, when I was just entering into this work, and again, kind of that trauma piece really helped solidify everything, is just, there's that whole systems thinking. And it was so hard to wrap my head around, because it does seem like all of those things are unrelated, but they all hit our body, and it ends up all being the same to our body. It doesn't matter if that message is about exercise or the state of your house or your body weight or about what you're eating or about, it doesn't, your age, your wrinkles, your this, your that, your job, your kids.
Yeah.
It all ends up sitting in the body exactly the same way. And so it actually doesn't end up mattering what it's about. It's the sensation, the feeling, the emotion, and how your body responds to that.
Yeah, 100% agree. How can people find you? I'll add it to the show links too, but please tell me a little bit more. If someone wants to learn more about you and what you do, how can they find you?
My business name is My Body Couture, which is 3 words. First word is my, M-Y. Second word is body, B-O-D-Y. Third word is the French word couture, C-O-U-T-U-R-E. So I'm at the .com. You can go to my website. That's where I post all my podcasts. I do have some links to some articles about trauma and the body. And then in terms of social media, I'm not like the most active person, because I don't really vibe with the whole like 10 quick secrets to doing whatever. But I do have any site where I am available. you'll find me at the My Body Couture handle. So you can look on Threads, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook. And really what I encourage people to do is to send me a message. So if you have questions, if you want to engage, definitely all about that.
And anything else that you want to add that we didn't go over?
I think that there is just capacity for people to learn about this in ways that I am still stunned by. So whether it's our body or psychology, trauma, emotions, I have been on a continuous education pathway I've been here in this space for 11 years. And then before that was doing it on my own, taking trainings. And it's just, the field evolves so quickly and there's just such a depth of information that I think, dip your toes in, see what grabs your attention, follow that thread, and just open yourself to that kind of lifelong learning process. And it has astonishing results for you.
Yeah. And we can heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Janice, for spending some time with me today.
Thank you for having me.